Welcome to Canada Unfiltered, your go-to source for candid discussions about politics. We expose what those in power try to hide. Subscribe now to uncover the true face of power.
On April 28th, Canadians elected a new federal government. Mark Carney, former governor of the Bank of Canada, became Prime Minister and leader of the Liberal Party. Following this victory, Carney addressed his caucus in their first official meeting to outline his government's legislative priorities. The session, partially open to journalists, marked the launch of what Carney described as an urgent and transformative agenda for Parliament. Carney's speech included a list of priority actions, with a strong emphasis on affordability, national infrastructure, interprovincial trade liberalization, and internal democratic reform. He also mentioned redefining Canada's economic and security relationship with the United States. These announcements come ahead of the reopening of Parliament and the upcoming throne speech to be delivered by King Charles III. Among the first legislative efforts promised is a tax cut aimed at addressing affordability, a major issue during the campaign. Carney also indicated that his ministers would introduce a bill to fast-track infrastructure projects deemed to be in the national interest. Additionally, he announced a proposal to eliminate all federal barriers to free trade within Canada, a recurring topic in Canadian economic policy debates. No draft bills or concrete legal texts have been presented so far to accompany these announcements. Key details such as what qualifies as a project of national interest or how interprovincial barriers will be dismantled remain unspecified. As such, while the goals are clear, the mechanisms for implementation are not yet public. Carney stated that Parliament would move swiftly, promising that this legislative session, despite being scheduled for just 1 month before summer recess, would be one of the busiest in Canadian history. He also claimed that his government would achieve results previously thought impossible at speeds not seen in generations. These statements, though ambitious, are rhetorical and currently lack empirical backing or measurable targets. One structural limitation is the government's minority status in Parliament. This means any legislation must gain support from at least one opposition party. Without a majority, the Liberals will need to engage in negotiations and coalition building to pass any bills, which may constrain their ability to act at the pace suggested in Carney's remarks. Another limitation is the timing of the federal budget. Traditionally introduced in the spring, the budget under Carney's administration has been delayed until the fall. Since no funding proposals are currently tied to the legislative agenda, it is unclear how new measures will be financed in the short term. Carney also faces internal party management issues. The caucus is reportedly considering adopting the Reform Act, a 2015 law authored by Conservative MP Michael Chung. This legislation empowers MPs to initiate a leadership review if 20% of the caucus signs a formal notice, followed by a simple majority vote to remove the leader. The context for this reform stems from the recent leadership crisis involving Justin Trudeau, who remained in office despite calls to step down until he resigned after Chrystia Freeland's public departure as finance minister. Some MPs support the Reform Act as a mechanism for improving internal accountability. MP Ryan Turnbull, for instance, publicly endorsed the proposal, arguing it would ensure democratic oversight within the party. Others, like MP Terry Sheehan, opposed the move, stating that the Liberal caucus is unified and capable of resolving disputes internally without formal procedures. The debate reflects broader tensions between centralized leadership and intra-party democracy. Carney's reference to a redefined economic and security relationship with the United States is also significant but remains vague. No policy details, negotiations, or timelines were disclosed. Given the complexity of international relations and Canada's reliance on U.S. markets, such a goal would require comprehensive planning and diplomatic engagement, none of which were outlined in the address. Similarly, the promise to dismantle interprovincial trade barriers has long been discussed in Canadian politics. A 2020 Senate report estimated these barriers cost the national economy up to $80 billion annually. However, many of these restrictions are rooted in provincial laws and practices, meaning federal legislation alone cannot eliminate them without provincial cooperation. Accelerating infrastructure projects is another complex task. A 2022 report by the Canadian Council for Public-Private Partnerships highlighted how major infrastructure initiatives in Canada often face delays due to regulatory fragmentation and environmental review processes. To overcome these challenges, clear legal definitions and a harmonized framework between federal and provincial authorities are essential. None of these components were addressed directly in Carney's speech. Many of Carney's declarations fall into the category of political rhetoric. Phrases such as delivering mandates with urgency and determination or getting going from minute one serve to energize audiences but do not provide operational clarity. The assertion that this will be the busiest session in parliamentary history is difficult to verify without data on previous legislative activity, including the number of bills introduced, hours of debate, or measures enacted. Another missing element in the coverage is reaction from the opposition parties. No statements from Conservative, NDP, or Bloc Québécois members were included. The article also lacks independent expert analysis that could provide perspective on the feasibility or implications of the proposed agenda. Without this, the presentation is framed primarily through the lens of the governing party, which can obscure a balanced assessment. There is also a lack of detail on how the government plans to achieve consensus with provinces, particularly in areas such as internal trade and infrastructure development, where jurisdictional cooperation is critical. The absence of intergovernmental strategy raises questions about the practical execution of these policies. Despite the bold tone, the legislative session's short duration, only 1 month before Parliament breaks until September, limits what can realistically be achieved. Without immediate access to a budget and with numerous legislative steps required for each initiative, the gap between political aspiration and legislative action may prove significant. In summary, Carney's legislative agenda addresses key national issues: affordability, infrastructure, internal trade, and party governance. These are legitimate priorities with real policy value. However, the lack of specific implementation plans, budget allocations, legal definitions, and timelines raises doubts about how much progress can be made in the immediate term. Structural constraints, such as minority government status and the short session calendar, further reduce the likelihood of rapid success. While the themes are politically resonant and the urgency is rhetorically strong, the speech leaves critical questions unanswered. The credibility of the agenda will depend not on how it was delivered, but on whether measurable progress can be made within existing parliamentary and institutional constraints. Will Mark Carney's government manage to deliver on its promises under these conditions, or will this legislative agenda become yet another case of political overreach without execution?
Thank you for taking the time to watch Canada Unfiltered. We truly appreciate your support. If you enjoyed the content, please consider subscribing and liking our videos. We encourage you to join the conversation with us as we explore various topics that matter to Canadians. Remember, Canada Unfiltered is all about staying informed, reacting to important issues, and speaking up for what you believe in. Let's engage in meaningful discussions together.